State of Texas, this court hereby assesses your punishment of death. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is going to complete your jury service. I'm going to meet you in...
The courtroom fell silent. Maria Aparece's mother stood at the witness stand, her voice breaking as she described the daughter she'd never see graduate, never see marry, never hold her grandchildren. And then, a sound so jarring it made heads snap around in disbelief. Laughter. Dexter Johnson, the 19-year-old who had kidnapped, assaulted and executed Maria and her boyfriend Huy in cold blood, was smirking, then chuckling, then openly laughing at a grieving mother's pain. The judge's face darkened, the bailiffs tensed. The victim's father lunged forward, restrained only by family members. "What are you going to do about it?" Johnson taunted, leaning back in his chair. "Kill me twice?" He thought his defiance made him untouchable. He thought wrong. What happened next would silence his laughter forever. If you're fascinated by the psychology behind such disturbing behavior, hit subscribe and the notification bell right now to never miss a case like this. Before they became headlines, Maria Aparece and Huy were just two young people with everything to live for. Maria was 23, a dedicated college student with dreams of becoming a nurse. Friends described her as the first to offer help, the last to ask for it. Her family had immigrated from the Philippines when she was young, and she worked part-time to help support them while maintaining her studies. Huy was 17, still in high school, but already accepted to college on a partial scholarship. Quiet but quick to smile, he had a talent for mathematics and planned to study engineering. They had been dating for just 6 months. That summer night in Houston, June 18, 2006, was supposed to be nothing special. Just two people enjoying each other's company, sitting in Maria's car, talking about their future. Maria had just finished her shift at a local restaurant. Huy had picked her up. They weren't ready to say goodnight, so they parked in a quiet neighborhood, windows down to catch the summer breeze. They had no reason to be afraid, no reason to suspect that this ordinary moment would be their last taste of normalcy. What they couldn't know was that someone was watching them, someone who had already decided their fate hours before. 5 pairs of eyes had spotted Maria's car. 5 people who saw not 2 young lives full of promise but targets, opportunities, things to be used and discarded. And among them was 19-year-old Dexter Johnson, a young man whose capacity for violence was about to be unleashed in ways that would shock even his accomplices. As Maria and Huy talked about tomorrow, they had no idea that for them, tomorrow would never come. It began with a tap on the window. A gun pointed at Huy's head. "Get out of the car." Those 4 words marked the beginning of a nightmare that would last for hours. Johnson and his 4 accomplices, Keithran Fields, Timothy Randall, Ashley Irvin, and Alvy Butler, forced their way into Maria's car. Johnson took the wheel. The couple was pushed into the back seat, a gun constantly trained on them. For the next several hours, the group drove around Houston, stopping at ATMs to force Maria and Huy to withdraw money. They took their credit cards, phones, jewelry, anything of value. But for Johnson, this wasn't enough. Court records would later reveal the horrifying details of what happened next. The group drove to a secluded area where Johnson forced Maria out of the car and into the woods. There, while he was held at gunpoint by the others, Johnson sexually assaulted Maria. Investigators would later testify that throughout the ordeal, Johnson seemed to enjoy the power he wielded over his victims. He wasn't just committing a crime, he was savoring their terror. After the assault, Johnson and his accomplices drove Maria and Huy to another wooded area in northeast Houston. They forced the couple to kneel. Maria begged for their lives. She promised not to tell anyone. She offered money, anything, if they would just let them go. Johnson's response was 2 bullets, one to the back of Huy's head, one to Maria's, execution style. The group then fled in Maria's car, leaving the bodies where they fell, holding hands even in death. But what investigators found at the scene would reveal something about the killer that even his accomplices didn't know. Under Maria's fingernails, DNA. A silent witness that would eventually speak volumes in court. The bodies were discovered the next morning by a passerby walking their dog. By then, Johnson and his accomplices had already used Maria's car in another carjacking, continuing a crime spree that had begun days earlier. Detective Carlos Cardenas of the Houston Police Department was assigned to the case. What initially appeared to be a tragic double homicide quickly revealed itself as part of something larger. "We realized we were dealing with a group that had been terrorizing the area," Cardenas would later testify. "This wasn't their first violent crime, but it was by far their most brutal." The breakthrough came 3 days later when officers spotted Maria's stolen car. A short chase ended with the arrest of 2 of the accomplices. Under questioning, they quickly implicated the others, including Johnson as the ringleader and shooter. Within a week, all 5 were in custody, but as evidence mounted, it became clear that Johnson had played the central role in the murders. The DNA found under Maria's fingernails matched Johnson's. Cell phone records placed him at the scene. And perhaps most damning, his own accomplices turned against him, each trying to minimize their own involvement by pointing to Johnson as the driving force behind the violence. This investigation took unexpected turns. If you're finding this case as disturbing as I did, give this video a like to help others discover it. As police built their case, they discovered something else, a pattern. Johnson and his group had committed at least 7 aggravated robberies in the week surrounding the murders, but none had escalated to the level of violence seen with Maria and Huy. The DNA results confirmed their worst fears, but it was what they found on his phone that truly revealed the monster they were dealing with. Text messages sent hours after the murders, joking about the killings, photos of him posing with the stolen items. No remorse, no recognition of the lives he had destroyed. Just pride. The trial began in May 2007, nearly a year after the murders. The Harris County Courthouse was packed, family members of both victims filling one side, media and curious public on the other. From the moment Johnson entered the courtroom, something was off. While most defendants in his position would appear somber, even fearful, Johnson strutted in with an air of confidence that bordered on arrogance. He acted like he was at a social gathering, not a capital murder trial, one juror would later recall. He would wave to people, smile, even wink at female jurors. It was disturbing. The prosecution's case was methodical and devastating. They presented the DNA evidence, the cell phone records, and the testimony of Johnson's former accomplices. Medical examiners detailed the execution-style killings with clinical precision that nonetheless left many in the courtroom in tears. Johnson's defense team attempted to shift blame to the other participants, arguing that it was impossible to know who had actually pulled the trigger. They suggested that the accomplices were framing Johnson to secure lighter sentences for themselves. But as witness after witness took the stand, a clear picture emerged, not just of Johnson's guilt, but of his character. A former teacher testified about his history of aggression. Former friends described his fascination with violence. And most damning of all, his own accomplices described how he had bragged about the killings afterward. As the medical examiner described the victim's final moments, everyone in the courtroom wept. Everyone except one person. Johnson sat there, occasionally whispering to his attorney, sometimes even smiling as if hearing an amusing anecdote rather than the details of how he had ended 2 young lives. The families watched him, their grief now mingled with disbelief at his apparent lack of remorse. But the true shock was yet to come. On the trial's 8th day, the prosecution rested its case. The evidence against Johnson was overwhelming, but before the defense would present their side, the court would hear victim impact statements, a chance for the families to address the court about their loss. Maria's mother approached the stand first. Small in stature but dignified in her grief, she clutched a framed photo of her daughter in graduation regalia. "Maria was the light of our family," she began, her voice soft but steady. "She worked so hard for everything she achieved. She was going to be a nurse. She wanted to help people." As she continued describing the hole left in their family, a sound interrupted her, a chuckle from the defense table. Johnson was laughing. The judge warned him to be respectful. Johnson nodded, but the smirk remained. When Huy's father took the stand, he spoke of his son's gentle nature, his academic promise, his kindness. "He was only 17, he said, his voice breaking. He had his whole life ahead of him. Again, Johnson's response was to roll his eyes and whisper something to his attorney that made him visibly uncomfortable. But it was when Maria's younger sister approached the stand that the courtroom atmosphere changed forever. "My sister was kind to everyone she met," she said through tears. "Even if she had met you under different circumstances, Dexter, she would have been kind to you too." Johnson's response was audible to everyone in the first 3 rows. "Yeah, she was real kind when I—" The rest of his comment was so vulgar, so shocking in its explicit reference to the sexual assault, that the court reporter later asked if she should include it in the transcript. The courtroom erupted. Maria's father lunged toward Johnson and had to be restrained by bailiffs. The judge immediately ordered the jury out and demanded order. This is where the case takes an unbelievable turn. Comment below if you've ever witnessed or heard of similar courtroom behavior. When order was finally restored, Johnson sat there, still smiling, seemingly pleased with the chaos he had created. What Johnson did next would seal his fate in ways his crimes alone might not have. As the judge reprimanded him for his behavior, warning that it would not help his case, Johnson leaned back in his chair and said, loud enough for the front rows to hear, "What are you going to do about it? Kill me twice?" Judge Marc Carter had presided over dozens of capital murder trials in his career. He was known for his even temperament and fairness. But in that moment, as he looked down at Johnson, something changed in his expression. "In my years on the bench," he began, his voice measured but carrying an edge rarely heard in his courtroom, "I have seen defendants who committed terrible acts out of desperation, rage, or mental illness. I have seen remorse, denial, and everything in between." He leaned forward. "What I have rarely seen is what's before me today. Someone who not only shows no remorse for taking 2 young lives, but who seems to take pleasure in the pain he has caused." The jury was instructed to disregard Johnson's outburst when considering their verdict, but the damage was done. After just 90 minutes of deliberation, one of the shortest in a Harris County capital case, they returned with a guilty verdict. The penalty phase was equally brief. The prosecution argued that Johnson's behavior in court only confirmed what his crimes had suggested, that he posed a continuing threat to society and had no capacity for rehabilitation. The defense presented evidence of Johnson's troubled childhood and argued that at 19 his brain was not fully developed. But their argument seemed hollow in the face of Johnson's continued inappropriate behavior during the proceedings. The jury recommended the death penalty. As the recommendation was read, Johnson finally lost his smile. Judge Carter delivered the formal sentence, fixing Johnson with a stare that many in the courtroom would later describe as the moment the gravity of his situation finally seemed to register with the defendant. "Dexter Johnson, you have been found guilty of capital murder and sentenced to death by lethal injection. You silenced 2 innocent voices forever. Today, justice silences yours." As Johnson was led away, the smirk was gone. The bravado vanished. For the first time, he looked afraid. The sentence was delivered, but there was one final twist that no one saw coming. As he reached the door to be led back to holding, Johnson turned and mouthed something to Maria's mother. A bailiff would later report that it was, "I'm sorry, too little, too late." In the years following the sentencing, Johnson's case wound its way through the appeals process. His attorneys argued everything from intellectual disability to inadequate representation, but each appeal was rejected. For the families of Maria and Huy, the legal process offered little comfort. "No verdict brings them back," Maria's father told reporters outside the courthouse, "but knowing he can never hurt another family like he hurt ours, that matters." The case had broader implications for Houston, coming during a period of increased gang violence in the city. It sparked community initiatives aimed at providing alternatives for at-risk youth and increased funding for victim support services. Johnson's accomplices received varying sentences. Keithron Fields was also sentenced to death. Timothy Randall received life without parole. Ashley Irvin, who had remained in the car during the murders, received 20 years. Alvy Butler, who cooperated extensively with prosecutors, received 15 years. As for Johnson, his execution date was set and delayed multiple times due to appeals. His behavior in prison was reportedly marked by the same disregard for others that he had shown in court. The case remains one of the most disturbing in Harris County history, not just for the brutality of the crimes, but for the chilling lack of remorse displayed by the perpetrator. For the families of Maria Aparece and Huy, no punishment could ever truly deliver justice. 2 bright lights were extinguished forever, 2 futures erased. All they could hope for was that the system would ensure Johnson could never harm another family. And in that at least they found some measure of peace. In courtrooms across America, defendants face justice every day. Some show remorse, some maintain innocence despite overwhelming evidence, but few display the shocking callousness that Dexter Johnson showed that day in court. His laughter in the face of unimaginable grief revealed something beyond criminal behavior. It revealed an absence of humanity that chilled everyone present. In the end, Johnson's own actions spoke louder than any evidence. His laughter silenced by justice, his future erased just as surely as he had erased Maria's and Huy's. If this case affected you, please subscribe to Cold-Blooded Killers for more stories that explore not just crimes, but the justice that follows. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Remember, we don't just tell these stories for shock value. We tell them to honor the victims, to understand the darkest corners of human behavior, and perhaps most importantly, to recognize the warning signs before tragedy strikes again. Until next time, stay safe. And remember, justice may be delayed, but it is rarely denied.